And you can find our recordings right on the website. This year, we're hosting an essay contest open to anyone within the Incorporated for Bragg, encouraging arguments for and against the name's return, reclaiming the name. All we ask is that there is research done as a foundation. We will award prizes of $2,000 and $1,000. We are also excited to announce an Indigenous Knowledge Workshop weekend at the Noyo Bida Ranch, which we actually did in April. A 70-acre indigenous-owned property right across from the Beachcomber Hotel. I'm really excited to announce we're actually organizing the first ever Indigenous Music Festival during 4th of July weekend. So please come join us and support us. We are in the process of working on a trailer for the Mendocino Film Festival, and hopefully we'll create a film about what's going on in this region.
It's all about the Electoral College. Boy, this is like deja vu.
Yes, indeed.
So in the South, there are the white folks and the black folks send different electors to vote in Washington, D.C. It's often called the Compromise of 1877 or the Sellout of 1877. But the Republicans agree that if their candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes, gets the Electoral College vote, they will remove troops from the South. And that's what happened. And you can imagine when the troops are removed, there's then nothing to stop former Confederate officers, former Confederate government officials to regroup and work very hard to disenfranchise the newly freed men and women of the South. So that's what was happening in 1889. And a kind of side note, black people who were being disenfranchised, who were being returned to a form of servitude as tenant farmers, many of them got the heck out of Dodge. And tens of thousands of black folks left the South and moved west. That was disturbing to some people.
That was 1877?
Yes.
Okay.
Hayes was inaugurated 1878. At that point, no, we'll get to it. There's an historian who has studied the history of sundown towns, and you might look for him. His name is James Lewin. And he writes, beginning around 1890 and continuing until 1968, white Americans established thousands of towns across the United States for white people only. That's the first. Second thing he writes, local historians omit this history intentionally, knowing it would reflect badly on their communities. So as black people leave the South in hopes of real freedom, political freedom, tens of thousands, 10,000, a minimum of 10,000 sundown towns are established across the United States. Somebody asked me earlier outside, so what's a sundown town? Well, there'd be a sign, literally, in many cases, a sign at city limits saying, N-word, don't let the sun set on you in this town. Now, there were other ways of enforcing it, vigilante action. Later it became more sophisticated, redlining, refusal to write mortgages, all those kinds of things, refusal to sell homes to black people. There were historically as well 100 sundown towns in our own state of California, which is interesting because here we were as even then, seemingly a liberal state. We'd entered as a free state, entered the Union in 1850, and had been on the winning side in the Civil War. Among the many sundown towns were those in Southern California, and you'll know these names: Glendale, Culver City, Palos Verdes Estates, Tarzana, all of which were created as specifically white suburbs around the melting pot of the city of Los Angeles. And some of these sundown towns actually had that sign at the edge of town, like this one in Hawthorne, California, a city on the South Bay, in the South Bay area of Los Angeles County. And this sign was up as late as the 1930s. It read, "N-word, don't let the sun set on you," capital Y-O-U, in Hawthorne. Was the city of Fort Bragg a sundown town? One of these thousands across the country. How do we know? How do you judge if a town was a sundown town? To answer that question, there are other questions to ask. And this is from James Lewin, and you might go, he's got a website where he lists historically sundown towns. It's online. First question is, has your town been a pronounced majority white town for many years? Secondly, did your town take premeditated steps to preserve its white racial hegemony? And third, has your town witnessed racial violence over many years, and were racial minorities excluded from residency by fear and intimidation? So 3 questions. So I tried to apply those questions to a history of our town. Required a bit of research. Has our city been a pronounced majority white town for many years? In a racially diverse country, it's unlikely that any single municipality would be overwhelmingly white by happenstance. This only occurs by imposing racial segregation. Quote, "If people of color aren't around," writes Lewin, "there's a reason, having something to do with history and exclusion." The city of Fort Bragg was incorporated in 1889. The first national census, and remember, a census of the entire population of the country is required every 10 years. That's in the Constitution. The first census after incorporation would have been 1890. That census shows a city population of 1,545, among whom there were 16 Chinese people, no black or indigenous people. Our city was 99% white. Now, I'm starting my story with incorporation of the city. I'm only speaking about the city and not about the fort, not about the violence of against Native people, not about their exploitation. They were gone by plan. They were marched over the hill by force of arms, and they were gone. So there were no natives in the city in 1900. By 1910, 10 years later, there were 3,126 residents in our city. By then, there were about 30 Chinese people, no Native Americans, no black people. Fort Bragg was 99% white. 10 years later, 1920, the city's residents numbered 2,588. There were 40 Chinese people. Most were institutional cooks or cooks out in the logging camps. There was a family of 5 Native Americans. The population was 98% white. 1930, the national census put the incorporated city population at 3,025. The total minority population were 21 Chinese people, 10 Mexican, 2 Native Americans, 1 Japanese, and 2 African Americans. Altogether, they made up less than 1% of the population. Interesting, the sole black resident was a man named Joe Perry, and white people ran him out of town. Anton Roy Sverko, who was born in 1912 in Fort Bragg. He worked 40 years for the Union Lumber Company. which was the biggest mill in town. He was speaking to interviewers in 1989. He was white. Quote, "There were no black families in town. That was against the rules. Just as soon as they come in, they got to leave. Inside 24 hours. Oh no color. The first time I ever saw a black man was the early part of my 20th year. That would have been 1932. The only one, his name was Joe Perry. He was a shoe shine man. He'd been here for a while, I guess about 10 years, and a fire started where he was polishing shoes. They claimed he'd done it, so they ran him out." End quote. That oral history was published by the city of Fort Bragg in 1989 to celebrate their centennial. Now Joe Perry was not just a shoe shine man, but had in fact purchased a shoe shine business, which he operated at 315 Franklin Street. And then they ran him out of town. That wasn't very far away at all. Now, what was life like for the few Chinese who lived here? Lorraine He Chorley has written a book called Chinese in Mendocino County. She writes, in the 1900s, the early 1900s, the Chinese were allowed to live in Fort Bragg and developed a small Chinatown in the 3-block area from Oak Street to Laurel Street. The community did not treat us as equals. In our childhood, the continued name-calling when we were simply walking down the street or participating in school sports activities was very hard for us to endure. It always seemed that my brothers were the only ones picked up after curfew, and when an item went missing, my brothers were usually accused of taking it." End quote. The 1940 census recorded a total Fort Bragg population of 3,244, of whom 21 were Chinese, 1 was Japanese, 1 Mexican, 1 Native American, and no black people. A city population that was still 99% white. In the 1950 census, the city population was 3,857. 13 were Chinese, 1 was a Filipina, 3 were Native Americans, there were 10 people of Mexican American descent. No black people were counted. In 1950, Fort Bragg was again 99% white. Therefore, it's not surprising that according to the most recent census in 2020, 130 years after its founding, Fort Bragg, with a population of 6,983, had an indigenous population of less than 3%, an African American population of 0.7%, an Asian population under 2%, and a white population of 63%. The big change after the 1950s had been the Latino population, which now numbers about 32% in our town. Now then, the second question. Was this 60-year history of 99 to 98% white majorities happenstance? Or did our town take premeditated steps to preserve its white racial hegemony? Did our town enforce racial exclusion? Sadly, we can see that the genocide inflicted by white settlers on the native peoples here continued as violent ethnic cleansing once the natives were expelled. There were anti-Chinese meetings up and down the Mendocino coast, beginning in 1886. And delegates were chosen to attend anti-Chinese statewide meetings in Sacramento. In that same year, lumbermen in Fort Bragg rebelled against the presence of Chinese laborers, causing, quote, men employed, and this is I have citations for everything I'm going to quote for you. I won't bore you with this, but a lot of this comes from our own Fort Bragg Advocate or the Mendocino Beacon, reporting, these are archival statements. Men employed by the Fort Bragg Redwood Company in the woods, which resulted in the woodsmen giving notice to the company of their intention to quit its service on the 6th of the month unless all Chinamen in the employ of the company were discharged before that day, end quote. 3 months after the city incorporated, the Fort Bragg Advocate reported, October 1889, quote, "A meeting of citizens took place Saturday evening in the pavilion for the purpose of taking action in regard to the Chinese wash house." That means a laundry. "Recently started in town. A committee was appointed to wait on the Chinese and tell them to go. We understand they replied in the negative. Trouble may follow. For most of the citizens of Fort Bragg are opposed to Chinese settling here." This is all up front in the newspaper. In 1892, anti-Chinese in Fort Bragg turned violent and made headlines across the state. Word had gotten out that the Fort Bragg Redwood Company had contracted with another company to bring in 40 Chinese workers to build a tunnel through Noyo Ridge. As the appointed day arrived, for the Chinese laborers to enter Fort Bragg in January 1892, the Ukiah Republican, then a local newspaper in Ukiah, obviously, quote, "The call was issued for a meeting of the citizens to take action in this matter, and the hall was filled to the outer doors long before the hour fixed for the meeting. Order and quietness prevailed. Speeches were made by leading citizens, and when the motion was made that the convention adjourn to meet at Happy Camp, where the Chinese were stopping, it was unanimously carried, and 150 of those who participated in the meeting were soon on the grounds at Happy Camp," end quote. The Chinese had settled in for the night at the end of the railroad track about 3 miles up Pudding Creek. Rain began to fall. Under cover of darkness, the 150 men from Fort Bragg surrounded the encampment and ordered the Chinese to their feet. Some ran to escape, either heading for the woods or jumping into the creek. The Fort Braggers rounded up the majority, rifles pointed at their heads, and forced marched them back towards town, some walking without shoes or coats. At Noyo, the armed men, and this is from the newspaper, at Noyo, the armed men pointed the Chinese back towards Mendocino and told them to keep going. Quote, "The effects of the Chinese were quickly bundled together, and the long, dreary march through the mud and the rain had begun." And, quote, "Another town in the state of California has got rid of the Chinese. Great credit is given to all those who took part in this forced exodus of the Chinamen." According to the Fort Bragg Advocate, men gathered on street corners here in town to boast of their accomplishment and to threaten those who continue to employ Chinese people as cooks and laundrymen, cigar makers, or general laborers. Among those involved in this vigilante action were prominent citizens. One was a respected physician in Fort Bragg. The other was the Fort Bragg postmaster. Another was the local Wells Fargo agent, as well as the president of the Knights of Labor in Mendocino County. 5 months later, the Knights of Labor announced regular meetings each Saturday at 8 o'clock at Redmond's Hall. Redmond's Hall stood where the outdoor store used to be here on Main Street. At some point, I want to do more research on the improved order of Redmen, but it involved white people dressing up as Indians. Tell you just that much. So they would hold meetings every Saturday at 8 o'clock and continue their anti-Chinese campaign in Fort Bragg with a post in the Fort Bragg Advocate. Quote, "There being a great many Chinese laundries in Mendocino County, and whereas we know there is a sufficient number of white women in need of laundry work to support themselves and their families, which is now given to the Chinese, therefore we, the Knights of Labor of Mendocino County, do boycott all Chinese laundries and do all in our power to cause others to do the same," end quote. Also in 1892, the Fort Bragg Redwood Company, later the Union Lumber Company, placed an ad in the Fort Bragg Advocate to assure local whites, quote, The Fort Bragg Redwood Company do not employ Chinese in any capacity except as cooks. Up the coast to the north, Rockport went so far as to burn the Chinese quarters down and let them know they were not welcome. The following year, the Fort Bragg Advocate asked, now that the Chinese quarters at Rockport have been burned, would this not be a good time to pass them along and give them the benefit of the deportation clause of the Geary Act? Too many unemployed white men now on the coast to render the Chinese presence necessary. It's really interesting how the present in many ways repeats the past in terms of forced deportations. So what about black people in Fort Bragg? In 1850, the first meeting of the California legislature disenfranchised black people. Native people had few rights and could be impressed into involuntary service by white settlers. Mixed marriages were banned. Which brings us to the movie The Klansman. Better known as Birth of a Nation. How many have people seen this movie?
Yeah.
I advise you to hold your nose and see this movie. It's probably the most racist movie ever made by Hollywood. The director, the famed director, was D.W. Griffith. And it was produced in 1915. And Fort Bragg comes into the larger picture here because we immediately wanted to show that movie in town. And when I taught, and most of my students were Mexican American, I would often, when I taught screenwriting, I would show this movie, and they were appalled. We have black men presented as rapists, stalking white women, black legislators in the Capitol getting drunk on the floor of the House or the State Senate, all being saved finally by the white night riders of the Ku Klux Klan. And in fact, this movie led to the rebirth of the Klan in 1916. Yep.
In 1918, it was the first movie ever seen at the White House for Wilson.
Oh, was that movie?
Yeah,
What year?
I believe it was 1918.
Woodrow Wilson, of course, was from Virginia. He was a segregationist. He resegregated the civil service, federal civil service, when he was president. And he endorsed the movie. The KKK reached its apex of power to impress and intimidate when 30,000, get this, 30,000 hooded and white-robed men and women paraded down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. in August of 1925. The Klan admitted white Protestant members only. It was anti-black, anti-Chinese, anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant, anti-everything that wasn't white and Protestant and native born. And the KKK was right here on our coast. On March 1st, 1916, the Fort Bragg Advocate News reported in the headline, quote, "Immense crowd seized the Klansmen," and went on, quote, "Over 1,000 people saw the Klansmen in Fort Bragg on Tuesday and Wednesday of last week, according to a statement by Phil Brubeck of the Union Theater." The Union Theater was also on Franklin Street, under whose direction the famous picture was shown. But most disturbing, and this shocked me, Dreamland, quote, Dreamland was filled both evenings and at the school children's matinee Wednesday afternoon. School classes were canceled. Kids were brought to the movie as if this white supremacist propaganda might be educational. On August 5th, 1925, the Fort Bragg Advocate News published an announcement from one H.G. Grannis, field officer of the Invisible Empire, that, quote, organizations of clans of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan Incorporated have been established in Marin, Sonoma, Mendocino, and Lake counties with the following tenets: supremacy of the white race in America, and the development and promotion of pure Americanism. The 1920s would see hundreds of Mendocino County residents don white robes and gaze upon burning crosses glowing in the hills above Willits, Ukiah, and Fort Bragg. The Mendocino Beacon reported in their July 4th, 1925 issue that a number of residents had received an invitation to a KKK Boonville initiation ceremony scheduled that evening for July 4th. Quote, it was reported that a large number of members of the order from outside districts will be present. On July 7th, 1926, the Fort Bragg Advocate wrote of a 5-day celebration in town, here in our town, describing it as the most eventful of celebrations that the city of Fort Bragg has ever had. A flag-raising ceremony brought attendees together on Sunday in front of Fort Bragg City Hall. The city was presented with a new silk flag donated by the American Legion, flag pole upon which Old Glory was raised had been installed at City Hall by the local chapter of the KKK. Working in tandem with the American Legion and the city of Fort Bragg, the Klan became part of a civic-minded infrastructure, despite a history wrought with violence. A small informational blurb from the Ukiah Republican Press on January 28, 1925, entitled Organized Here, stated, quote, a burning cross was seen on the hills to the west of Ukiah Wednesday, and it is understood the KKK organized here that evening, end quote. A few months later, the Fort Bragg Advocate described a Ku Klux Klan ceremony that drew the attention of Fort Bragg's entire business district. Quote, this ceremony occurred the previous Sunday evening around 8 o'clock when onlookers described a fiery cross being set ablaze at the extreme north end of Franklin Street on the banks of Pudding Creek, but plainly visible from the business district. The fire drew a large crowd who saw, quote, a mammoth blazing cross was flaring forth on the west slope of Bald Hill, near the summit. Spectators using field glasses were able to see an estimated 200 people gathered around the large burning cross, all wearing, quote, the white regalia worn by members of the KKK. The article stated that the burning of the fiery cross by Klansmen signified an additional 100 new members have been added to the organization. The opening line of an article from the July 8, 1925 issue of the Fort Bragg Advocate read, and I quote, a beautiful ceremony and a beautiful setting over which a full moon shone marked the open-air initiation of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan in Anderson Valley near Boonville last Saturday evening. To the casual onlooker, it was solemn and impressive, and the white-robed Klansmen moving about in the glare of the huge fiery cross lent it an air of ghostliness. On October 24, 1925, the Fort Bragg Advocate reported a monster open-air initiation ceremony of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, which took place in Willits. Reportedly, quote, from almost any vantage point could be seen the huge fiery cross that looked down from the top of a high mountain to the north of Willits. Thousands of spectators were said to have attended the event, assisted by a special train that ran from Fort Bragg, which carried a great many Klansmen from the coast section. Okay, so we don't have to wonder how Fort Bragg remained 99% white in the 1920s and 1930s and 1940s. So that's a very abbreviated form, is the racist history on the Mendocino coast. And really takes us to the question of what do we do? How do we deal with this? What is our reaction? As I said earlier, some of the sundown towns had signs at the city limits. N-word, don't let the sun come down on you in this town. Others relied on their reputation. I think people are probably familiar with the Green Book. Maybe you've seen the movie. It was called the Negro Motorist Green Book. It listed safe places for African Americans who were traveling. Hotels, motels, restaurants where they might be welcome. There are no listings in the Green Book for Fort Bragg. Some towns relied upon their city name to enforce the white only rule. One of them was Anna, Illinois, because everyone understood what Anna stood for. It stood for ain't no N-word in Anna. Fort Bragg had its name. From the massacres of Native people to the forcible expulsion of Chinese and black people, its reputation was well known. Now people will say, I've already heard that's history, who cares? We move beyond that. No, I don't think so. The city council in this hall recently declared this month would be Indigenous Peoples Month, Native Americans Month. They said nothing about the Mendocino Indian Reservation. They said nothing about the massacres that occurred here. So unless people understand and know the history, we just erase it. What has been lost? I think that's the important thing. I know we're not supposed to talk about diversity anymore. But when you don't have diversity, you lose a lot, because different races and ethnicities have contributed a lot to American development. I think people know the Chinese, while they were being expelled from Fort Bragg, we depended upon them to build the Transcontinental Railroad. They built the western part of that, the most dangerous part, through mountains, blasting along, yeah.
Phil, when was the Chinese Exclusion Act in California compared to when the Chinese were kicked out of Fort Bragg?
It was around, yes. Yes, please. What was it?
What was
I
it?
believe so, 1918, 1919, and then, because the census in the 20 and 30, they started defining, well, along with eugenics, started defining race and ethnicity. So Mexican Americans in the 1920 census were categorized as white. By 1930 census, like, they weren't, and so that was a weird time, right around there, right at the end of World War I.
Not only that, I don't think too many people know about the Native American Religious Freedom Act, where it was illegal for Native Americans to conduct their ceremonies. Do you know about that?
No.
No.
Until
I,
the 70s, right?
Until the 1970s, it
Yes.
was actually illegal for Native Americans to have their dances and religious
Oh,
ceremonies.
my God.
The Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1882.
Thank you.
Well, that's not much of a year.
Yes.
There were a series of legislation. There was legislation, they weren't allowed to become citizens, they weren't allowed to enter the country, they weren't allowed to vote. And it took a series of legislation.
Yeah.
I think that, and which coincides with the completion of the railroad and no longer a need for it. But my wife and I were we had driven to LA and back, and we stopped in a little town called Locke, L-O-C-K-E. And it's the only town in the United States founded by Chinese people for Chinese people. And it goes back to the early part of the 20th century. But my point was, what do we lose when we exclude people? I didn't know that the Chinese in the Sacramento Delta came over because they knew how to reclaim arable land from marshland. And they worked in the Delta and they reclaimed 90,000 acres of agricultural land, which they were not allowed to own, but which they accomplished for us. So what do we do? And there are a lot, this is unfinished, and I want to hear from you. I've talked too long, I know. Quote from Was Your Town a Sundown Town? Every sundown town needs to be asked to do 3 things to overcome its past. First, it has to admit what happened. Second, it must apologize for it. Third, it should state that it no longer discriminates, and then back that statement with changed action, like a civil rights ombudsman or human relations board to hear complaints. Happily, some sundown towns have begun to confront their legacies. In March of 2015, the City Council of Goshen, Indiana voted 6-0 to pass a resolution acknowledging the racially exclusionary past of Goshen, Indiana as a sundown town. They admitted what had happened there. In late 2016, the mayor of La Crosse, Wisconsin, formally apologized for that city's history of racial exclusion and signed a proclamation to work towards racial equality. Quote, the mayor, "We've got issues and are not shirking away from those issues. We recognize this is a problem and we need to do something about it." Now, Fort Bragg it was not unique or different or worse than these other towns, but it was not unique and different and better either. The same issues were here. In a little town in Wyoming, Rock Springs was probably the worst of anti-Chinese action in our history. And there it was directed at Chinese miners. The white citizens of Rock Springs attacked the homes and the shops. The mob killed 28 Chinese people, injured another 14. That was in 1885. In 2025, the town organized to put up a 7-foot memorial to the victims of this anti-Chinese violence. It is called Requiem. You can go online and see it. It's quite impressive. It shows a Chinese miner standing amidst the ruins of Chinatown, holding the remnants of a ceremonial dragon flag in 2025. So the question is, what is Fort Bragg going to do? And that's a question for all of us and for all the people who aren't here as well. So as I said, this is an ongoing research project for me. I'm learning things I never knew. I hope you have some new information. I don't mean to depress you, really. I think rather we need to be energized with knowledge to do something. But yes, I've talked way too long. What would you like to say?
Well, I'm old enough to have grown up when racism was pretty endemic in our culture. In fact, I remember when I was a little kid, you played cowboys and Indians, and the background thing was if you were called an Indian lover, that was the ultimate insult, because you were kind of a traitor to your own race or whatever. And it took me, a lifetime of, rubbing elbows with every culture and stuff to lose my own racism. I feel I have. But what I'd like to ask is, where are the black people in this town today? How many black people do you see in Fort Bragg? Almost zero.
Well, it's less, what did I say, it was like 0.7% of the population.
I know, but it's almost, anyways, and they.
What, but ask yourself, so why would they be here?
I know. Exactly. I feel scared,
Right.
frankly, and not only that, last summer, around, I don't know exactly, it was around 4th of July, because there's a lot of red, white, and blue motif to the Fort Bragg Blues Festival. And I just happened to notice that there was not one black blues artist for the Fort Bragg Blues Festival.
Yeah, there was.
Was there?
Yeah, he played here.
Oh, okay, I didn't come to the.
Old blues guy, forget his name.
Okay, one guy.
The
But
whole
They
band.
didn't have, did he?
Yeah,
Okay.
he brought his
That's
whole
good to
group.
hear.
It is good, yeah, it was,
Okay, so I'm wrong about
Refreshing.
that, but I went to the outdoor festival and I didn't see too many, and they had a Bourbon Street marching band. I've been to New Orleans, and there was not one black person in that Bourbon Street marching band,
pretty
for
sad.
instance, so I don't know. It's still here today, but I would like to see, you asked what we could do, I would like to see the Fort Bragg City Council acknowledge that they're on Indian land, at the beginning of their meetings, like a lot of other places do.
They acknowledged it once, but they don't do it at all.
They should do it every time they meet.
I agree.
And also, you can't deny seeing these Fort Bragg Forever signs like everywhere in town. So it's like a reaction against you. It's ridiculous.
Not me.
Well, not you. I'm sorry.
The
I'm gonna put it
idea.
on your shoulders.
Phil started that group too.
Yeah.
Fort Bragg.
I mean, you're a brave man to be doing this.
What do those Fort Bragg Forever signs mean? I mean, think about it. What?
Fear,
Huh?
fear,
Fear.
fear of losing something,
People
an
have-
ownership to their place. I have a few ideas that I'd like to speak to. Hello. I think I've been speaking, well, I have a lot of different things. One is a story that I was told by my teacher, who is fifth generation Mendocino person, Bill Lemos.
Uh-huh.
He was an incredible teacher, and he told me when he was a kid that he would climb through these tunnels that were created by the Chinese to hide, all under Mendocino. And he could actually crawl from one side of the highway all the way under, and he came up inside Mendoza's. And it was only enough, like, for one way. You could, and it was tiny, but I just thought that was a very interesting story, just of the reality of, like, they had to live underground if they even wanted to survive or escape. Um,
On that same note,
Yes.
though, that same tunnel was used by the Italian farmers,
Right?
yes,
Okay.
that lived on that side of
That's right.
the freeway, and during World War II couldn't
Right.
cross the bound, and so that's
Wow.
how they got their produce to
Wow,
Mendoza.
okay. That's,
Oh, interesting history.
yeah, so that was, I was just kind of blown away by his historical context.
That
Just wanted to share a
in
little bit of that.
Alice Ibeck's book, which is at the Guest House Museum.
Oh, okay. The other thing that, what do we want to do? I hear that. And I've been speaking with Pastor Matt at the Presbyterian Church, and he's very,
In Mendon.
in Mendocino. And he very much wants to do a project called The Untold Story. And the untold story done through song and dance, so that there's this process, this catharsis that can happen of acknowledging of the grief, of the sadness of the genocide, and also then telling the healing and the future that we want to build. So that's a project that I'm very interested in working on, and that's one thing that we could do. Art has an access to our human spirit that not much else has. And so that is one piece that I think we can do, and to work towards that, and to work with the city and the film, and visuals and all of that. So that, I'd just like to plant that seed, that is something that we can do, and actually bring in our youth and learn and also heal through that process.
Dashiell?
Actually, there was a very recent instance of driving a black person out of town. It's actually the only black-owned business. They owned a food truck that used to be on the property of the company store.
Okay.
The owner of the company store, I guess, didn't like the guy and reported him for a years-old marijuana crime in I think it was Louisiana. I think it's from the South. And after very successful business for I think he was here about a year, the owner of the company store reported him and basically drove him out, him and his wife out of town, took back the food truck, and then started it up with some other person in town. And it still happens.
When was
here.
that?
Oh, 2021.
Yeah, it was that.
Whose food truck?
Claire?
David's figure.
To begin with, whose food truck was it?
I just wanted to address this gentleman's question about where are the black people? Without saying any names or giving any information, we know at least 3 black people living locally. All 3 say they deal with racism and discrimination on a regular basis here, and their children too.
Yeah, I had a friend come up back when I was in high school, and he was black, and my brother and him were hitchhiking, and he was like, no way, there is a serious lack of color. He was scared, and he wouldn't hitchhike. This is back in the 80s. He was like, no, he wouldn't even go out.
Mark?
Our friend Pam, she had a black friend here in Fort Bragg, and he could not come downtown at night. That's Pam, our bike group, Pam.
Wow.
Paul?
This discrimination also applied against Portuguese in Mendocino, and I was told by, someone who was from a long time Portuguese family that it was the same thing like a sundown thing at 6 o'clock, that the Portuguese had to leave, where the downtown Mendocino, and if they didn't, they got arrested, they got into trouble, and he relayed that his grandfather was constantly getting into trouble. But it was interesting that it just expanded beyond just anyone who was white, it also applied to the Portuguese.
Well, Fort Bragg itself was segregated. The Italians lived here, the Finns lived there, and the Portuguese lived over here. This is in the 20s, 30s, and 40s.
I think a lot of towns were that way. I
Yeah.
know my father grew up in a town like that.
But is that really segregation, or is it just the fact that you want to live next to somebody who has the same culture and language that you have?
Well, if you don't have a right to be there in the first place, you get harassed. I mean, these were people who were, if they were there, they were harassed. So,
Well, segregation is fundamentally systemic, so it has to be something that is enforced by local governance.
but this was, that, we're talking about the turn of the century, not this turn of the century, but early 1900s, so,
But it is still implemented by the government.
yeah.
Scott?
Yeah, I just want to pause and take in the the gravity and the emotional aspect of what I'm feeling in the room. I'm really interested in what to do, and I just really have to commend you, Phil, because at times I feel there's an impatience. I want it to change, and I really respect and honor this slow, gradual, powerful process of honoring truth. And I mean, on some level, I can see the lectern being turned down, the voices being increased, but there's just a poise and a truth and a power to the depth of this. And Joanna Macy, which some of you may know, has something called the work that reconnects, and I might not have all the parts of the spiral, but start with gratitude and acknowledge this is a wonderful place and a beautiful history. And then the second step, I believe, is acknowledging the grief and horror and anger on a genuine way. That we have the resources and capacity to actually feel that, so that we can potentially see solutions and reconciliation and healing, and then to go forward. And I spoke in this room to what do the folks who have lived here, how could I be compassionate to the people who have lived generations here? And there's a sign near my house that doesn't say Fort Bragg forever. It says, it's got an FB and a heart, and it says, I hallucinated, totally sober, please don't change our name, but it says don't change your name. But I saw it in the heart, and I thought, the people that have been here for generations, who were fishermen and loggers, and decent people, who were complicit or oblivious to it, somehow the nuance of, they are complicit, they have to take to heart what they were part of, and they were noble, wonderful people. And those of us who have done some work on ourselves, we can look deeply into our shadows and also come through and see that it's okay to go forward. And I think that there's a deep fear of actually facing that those fishermen weren't noble by overfishing. They weren't. The loggers did misuse the resources. And so, and they were wonderful and noble and were not disrespecting your ancestors, your grandfather. So those of us in the room seem like we have the capacity to do that work, but I want to get in real efficacious dialogue with the rest of the folks who maybe don't even have the paradigms to do that. But again, I appreciate the patience and the slowness and the power of truth, but yeah, and just the heaviness of what we're really actually talking about.
I just want to encourage everyone that we need more board members, we need volunteers, and we need financial support. So, that's how you could give back, is support us any which way you can. And partnered, I will follow up with Matt, he's a friend of mine. And we're gonna write grants, and we're gonna bring in some more money, and we're planning to do a lot of things.
Yep.
I have to really watch it because, my way of dealing with all this craziness going on is to write satire or kind of sarcastic stuff, which I realize you can't do. Personally, I can't do it anymore because it's just gone so far. I mean, just taking the seal of the city of Fort Bragg, for instance. I mean, they have a redwood tree and a salmon. They cut down all the redwood trees, and now there's no more salmon. I mean, so maybe they could change the seal to like a stump and a fish skeleton. And it goes further, because I heard about them rounding up the homeless for internment camps, I don't know if you've read about this stuff, but apparently they're building internment camps for the homeless to give them mental counseling and so forth. So I was thinking, don't tell anybody this. I hope the camera's not on, but starting a charity called Guns for the Homeless, or so you can't write this stuff. Or I have another one, but it's too far. So that's what I mean. I can't write satire anymore.
Yeah, don't go any further.
I think it's very easy to be weighed down by the weight of what's going on today. And then visit what's happened in the past. But we have to really look for the bright spots.
Right.
And what I thought when you mentioned the salmon was they're taking down the dams on the Eel River. The salmon are coming back.
When they had the first.
Things are happening, and it's really Native people who are taking the lead in this.
Yes.
And that's the other thing, I can't write the piece called Deep Sea Fishing Trips Off Venezuela, It's just not funny.
God, I'm sorry.
It's just not, people are dying,
That's right.
So anyway.
I think we're gonna, I think we're gonna end here, but not end, because we're gonna continue. I really appreciate your coming. Do share with us your names and email addresses in the back. Excuse me, there's a large box for donations. You can fill that up We now have T-shirts and caps, and we'll look for you at future meetings. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.